Welcome to the Daily Bite with your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. Today we conclude our study of John's Gospel with John chapter 21. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid out on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them, and although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a 2nd time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the 3rd time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." "Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them, the one who also had leaned back against him during the supper and had said, "Lord, who is it that is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about this man?" Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me." So the saying spread abroad among the brothers that this disciple was not to die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he was not to die, but, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you?" This is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things, and who has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true. Now there are also many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. This is the word of the Lord. So as we consider our final chapter here together in John, it's going to bring us a miracle account that Jesus performs after the resurrection. So they're by the Sea of Tiberias, which is another name for the Sea of Galilee, so at the northern edge of the Jordan River, a place close to where Jesus and the disciples had done most of their ministry together in the region of Galilee. And we get the idea that several of the disciples are gathered: Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, including John, again, our author here, and then 2 others, which is intriguing in that regard, why they're not mentioned by name. That's 7 in total. 7 out of the 11. So we're not told who's missing for sure, but 7 are there. And Peter declares he's going to go fishing. They all decide to go with him, so they get in the boat and they go out. And we learn that night they caught nothing. So why did they fish through the night? The most likely reason here is that that's simply one of the best times to catch fish. That fish tend to be more active in those windows of the hours just before the sun rises. For several reasons. Cooler water temperature gets them moving a little bit better. Possibly whatever prey that they're after to seek out for food themselves. And so it's not uncommon. You could also then connect it to several other things. The idea that it would not be as hot. It gets a little toasty on a boat in the sunshine, so it's cooler in the night. And then the idea of the market, to be able to catch fish and have them ready to sell in the market in the morning, as that's how you would then make the living to buy food for your own family and so forth. So they went out assuming they'd catch some fish, and they catch none. Then we get to the second paragraph, and Jesus is going to reveal himself to them, but he starts by calling out to them, asking if they have fish. You can imagine the picture, right? Again, the possibility of catching some fish, taking them to market. Here's a guy that's just nearby, and maybe he's just asking us to sell him a fish. Certainly not what's going on, but perhaps what they might have imagined. And he ends up instructing them to cast on the right side, and they would find some. Remember, they just fished all night and found nothing. When they do, they can't haul it in. The quantity is so large they struggle to even manage this net now. You might recall a similar miracle that Jesus has performed. Back in Luke chapter 5, it's part of Jesus calling the disciples. That they catch so many fish, the boats begin to sink, and they have to call for help and get the other boats to come over and assist them. At this, John, who was there for that other miraculous catch as well, John recognizes this is Jesus. I've seen this before. And so he reports to Peter, this is Jesus. It's interesting that John caught on to the miracle and Peter had not. But Peter trusted John. And so hearing that this was Jesus, Peter put his clothes back on. He had taken some off for work. As you can imagine, you're working out in the yard on a summer day or something like that. You get warm. You might take off a garment. In this case, your shirt. Peter taking off the outer layer simply from possibly even for the freedom of movement, as it's not wrapped around him now. Regardless, he puts it on, jumps into the sea, and swims to shore, whereas the other 6, they stay in the boat, and they bring the fish back to shore as well. When they get out, Jesus already has a fire going. He already has fish, and he has bread. He's making breakfast, as you might call it, and the disciples are going to end up joining him. Now, a good family conversation. Why do you think John chose to include this story and chose to end his gospel with this story? We had chapter 20's ending that Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, but they're not written in this book. These are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ. And we have the ending of this one, chapter 21, verse 25, that there were many other things Jesus did. If all of them were written down, not even the books of the world could hold them all. So why this one? What was it about this account that John wrote it down? And in addition to that, why is he so detailed in the account? Why did it matter that Peter had put his clothing back on or taken them off in the first place? Why did it matter that the instruction was to cast the net onto the right side of the boat? Why does it matter that the number is 153 fish and the net didn't break? Hopefully you're catching on that these are eyewitness details. This is John. He was there. He was present. He remembers these things. It gives credibility to the account as he records this miracle for us. Now, why record this particular miracle may be connected to what appears to be a conversation that happened right after the breakfast. As John is bringing us to the restoration of Peter, but we'll come back to that. So first, with the 153 fish, many people over the years have tried to suggest different symbology for the 153. Maybe there is something. I don't know. They're all educated guesses. I think it's okay to simply recognize that it's a detail. It's just a detail of the text. John is remembering this number from all those years ago, a good 60 years ago, but he still remembers because it was that important. It was that different. It was that unique. They'd never had such a haul before. And so the number stayed with him. Eyewitness testimony. That's enough. Again, there might be more to it, but it's truly a miracle, both in the idea of how many fish they caught after catching nothing, and in the way that the Lord cared for their net, too. And remember, they will become fishers of men, as Jesus has told them elsewhere. So they will be casting that net wide and far. They don't ask him at breakfast who he is, so even though he's still hidden from them, as he was hidden from Mary Magdalene before, and she couldn't recognize him until he allowed her to, here it's the same. Like, they don't ask him, who are you? Because they've got the miraculous already, and so they're recognizing that it's Jesus, even though that blinding hasn't been lifted off their eyes. They may not physically recognize him, but they know they're in the presence of God. Third time he's revealed himself to the disciples after being raised from the dead. So first day, 8th day, or 8 days later. And we're not told where in the 40-day window before the ascension this event occurred. So they finish breakfast. Jesus takes Simon Peter, and he's going to 3 times ask him if he loves him. Again, family conversation point. Why does Jesus ask Peter the question 3 times? The goal there is to connect back to the crucifixion account, where Peter denied Jesus 3 times. We might expect to hear forgiveness in this account. That would make sense. It's not here. This is a reinstatement. That Peter had fallen away, but he repented, and the Lord is now reinstating Peter as, again, a leader amongst his people, an apostle who will serve him. I can see how Roman Catholic congregations would take this a little further and talk about Peter as the first pope. Matthew's text, the way that whole thing plays out, I think is clear enough, both in English and in Greek, as to why, as Lutherans, we don't believe that Peter is the first pope. The word rock that Jesus will speak, on this rock I will build my church, is feminine, referring not to Peter, but to his confession. That's good enough for me. It's also noteworthy that after Peter makes the great confession of faith, the next thing he does is he gets rebuked by Jesus, and Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." So if his great confession of faith was the moment that the papacy began, the first act of the papacy was to be called Satan by Jesus. So it just doesn't connect well. But I can see that with a text like this. We do not disagree that Peter was a leader among the early Christians. Certainly. And that's all that I would take this as. So Peter has denied Jesus 3 times, so Jesus will 3 times ask Peter if he loves him. And he will give him essentially the same instruction each time. It's just different words. So feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. Lamb and sheep are synonyms. Tend and feed, pretty much synonyms in this case. Care for the flock. Peter, care for my people. Jesus is going to ascend into heaven. Peter is one of the under-shepherds, as any pastor today, any faithful pastor today, is an under-shepherd of the flock. And this is what God has given us to do, is to care for his people. So Peter's grieved by it. Doesn't seem, at least initially, to have made the connection himself, and so he's grieved that Jesus asks 3 times. But it does, it mirrors, it parallels that account of his denials. In verse 18, Jesus tells him really how he's going to die. It would be more confusing if we didn't have that note from John in verse 19, which says by what kind of death he was to glorify God. So this is not just old age. This is not a reference to living in a nursing home where you don't get to dress yourself and you don't get to go to the places you want to go to, but you just do whatever they do for you. And this is a reference to his crucifixion, where they would dress him and they would take him to the cross, where he doesn't want to go. In fact, Peter, in his crucifixion account, he didn't want to be crucified. He didn't want to die the same way his Lord died. So he actually asked if they could crucify him upside down, and they did. So crucifixion in 68 AD is the martyrdom account of Peter, and it is indeed glorifying to God. Peter's death points to God. He points to God even in death. That's the strength of the martyrs, is that even in that moment, they're still thinking of the Lord. They're still trusting in the Lord, and they're still confessing their faith for others to hear. It is a witness, and sometimes it is a witness that the Holy Spirit has used to create faith, as they gave a reason for the hope that was in them. So Jesus instructs Peter, follow me. Now, as Peter looks, he sees John coming up behind him, and he asks, what about this man? What's going to happen to John? So that's showing a relationship between Peter and John, that Peter, as he's just been told to feed the lambs, he sees John as one of those that maybe he's going to be caring for. So what's going to happen to John? This is, again, a personal detail that John can remember. He and Peter probably had this conversation multiple times, recalling this day. Jesus' response actually causes confusion for the disciples, but essentially what Jesus is saying is, don't worry about it. Right? If it's my will that he remains until I come, what is that to you? You follow me. Concern yourself only with what the Lord has entrusted to you to do. You don't need to know what's on another man's plate. You don't need to know how he's going to die or what's going to happen to him. You focus on what the Lord has given you to do. I think this is fair in terms of how people sometimes talk about paradise. Will there be different levels? Usually they'll say levels of heaven, rewards in heaven. And I like the word paradise better. Heaven makes it sound like we're not going to be on the new earth. There's a new heaven and a new earth. So I just call it all collectively paradise. And I'll leave that to the Lord. But will there be different levels? I don't know. And if there are, we won't care. Why? You follow me. Our eyes will be fixed on Jesus Christ. We won't be concerned about what's on the plate of our neighbor. If the Lord has entrusted more in paradise for them to do than he's entrusted to us, we'll be there. We'll be with Christ, and that's all that'll matter. And so it is here. This is what Jesus is giving Peter to do. Focus on the work that you have. You have your vocations, your roles, your relationships, and John will have his. But John does note that the way Jesus phrased it caused a bit of a rumor amongst the brothers that he was not going to die. So they thought John would live until Christ returned, or Christ, like Elijah and Enoch, perhaps, took him off this earth. But maybe we could read it. I think we've already done it the best we can. The idea that it's just a statement, like, don't concern yourself with that. We can also, though, look at the idea that John was not a martyr. So if we're talking about dying to glorify God, John's death is different. There was an attempt to martyr him, to boil him alive in oil, but the Lord spared him from that. Perhaps for the sake of being able to write the 5 books of the New Testament that he would later write, We don't know. That would be looking into the hidden will of God. So John reveals in verse 24 that all along it has been him himself he's been talking about, that this is the disciple bearing witness. So he's writing down his testimony from his life. This is his last will and testimony, if you want to phrase it this way. And the final note, Jesus did many other things. If we wrote them all down, the books of the world could not hold them. It's an impressive note. Literature wasn't that grand at the time in terms of just quantity of it. There weren't a lot of literate people, and the ability to write, they wrote on things like parchment and papyrus and had to roll up in scrolls. We have thinner paper today, and we also have a digital age. It'd be interesting if this were written today, even if John were to say that the things that Jesus has done could not be contained even in our digital catalog. And that's the idea that Jesus is the creator. All of this, look around, all of this is his work. The world itself has been created by him. So we thank the Lord, and this is the end of John's gospel that we get to, again, as he said in chapter 20, these things are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and by believing, you may have life in his name. So I pray the gospel of John has been a blessing to you and to your family.